Hello all, welcome back. Sorry for the previous video that we were not able to complete everything, but hopefully you learned something out of it. And if you're watching it directly and you haven't watched the previous video, I would highly encourage you to go and watch the part 1 of this video where we have talked about the GET request specifically. The link of the previous video will be in the pinned comment or the description of this video and the description of video. So let's get started. So where we left off is we did the GET request and we did not do the post, put, patch and delete, which are available in this particular endpoint that we are testing it. So we did the GET, we tried all these 3 examples, everything worked fine. And the reason why it took a lot of time to do the GET is because we are trying to process and understand how you read a JSON object into it. So today we're talking about adding an object. So while adding an object, you need to call this endpoint, which is the standard endpoint, and then you need to pass the object that you want to create, and then based on that it'll create that object. So should we get started? Yes, but before that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, hit the subscribe button. It tells us how we are doing. It also tells us, are you liking the content that we are making? And it's a great push toward or a motivation to keep doing this, to be very frank. Okay, so let's get back into our code and let's continue where we left. Okay, I've cloned the repo again. The part 1 video was already updated on GitHub. So now we are trying to do the post command. So let me go to the page first, and what we have done, look at it. Okay, but we have done the GET, so GET is done. Now we're going to do the post. Now post, we'll call the post record method in my code unit, which is this. So what changes? Nothing changes much. So what I'll do is I'll just copy this as it is from the GET and put it into the post, and I'll change the method here from GET to post, and here also from GET to post. Now let's try to see what changes we'll have to do in the process response. Okay, let's come here. We haven't written the scenario of post, so let's just quickly add the scenario of post, and in this I'm just going to write it as message, whatever is coming as the response. Okay, not going into reading and writing it, right? Let's keep it simple. Now the only difference between calling the same function of make request is, and let's review this, we got the content headers, we cleared the headers, we set our headers that we needed, we set the content into it, and we set the URL, and then based on the method we are calling that HTTP method, and then we are making the request and then getting the response out of it. The only thing that is different from a GET and a post is that we need to send this as kind of a payload or the data that we are sending to the API endpoint. So how we do that? We'll have to add one more parameter into it, and that will be the input parameter of, let's say here, let's do it payload as text. So when we send that, we'll have to also pass the payload so that it can then be passed with the request and it then can be written. Now in case of GET, the payload would be empty. So what I'll do is we'll do a condition here that if my payload is not equal to blank, if it has value, if this kind of request that you're making has value against it, then what I would like to do is on the content that I'm passing, I would like to write data from my payload. So whatever JSON object that I'll be creating, I'll pass it into the payload, and that will be written into the content, and then the content is already being written into the request. Don't worry about this clear, because we are only clearing the headers. So first we are writing whatever the data that you are trying to push to the API endpoint into my content. Then we are setting the content headers, and then we are already writing the content onto the request, and then we are deciding the method and all, and then we're making the send call. So if we just define the payload, it'll do the magic. So let's come here. Yes, there is an error because the get does not require a payload, so we'll just pass it to the blank. Now in case of post or create record, oh sorry, I should have done it here. I'll need to define the payload based on the endpoint that it needs. Okay, so I need to generate that payload that I need. So what I'll do is I'll create a new code unit. Believe me, I don't like to create it, but it makes sense not to put everything here. So let's call it as SDH. I guess we had a code unit in the past. We did not. Okay, so we'll call it as payload or SDH no auth payload management. Now this code unit will deal with any kind of payload that we need, right? So I'll call this code unit in my post request. I'll call it as payload generator. I'll call this. On this I'll create a method which is generate post payload no auth or post payload. Let's keep it simple. Okay, now this will return me the text that I need, so I can just go ahead and say create this method. If this works, should, but let's check. Okay, generate method. Okay, so here is the generate post payload method. Now this method is where I'll define my object that I need to pass. Let's see what I need to pass, and let's copy it here. Okay, so I'll keep it as here as comment, so that's easier to reference while I'm creating the object. Okay, here is the object that I want to create. So let's, because we want to create a JSON object, let's create a variable for my JSON object that I want to create. JSON object of type JSON object. Okay, this will be confusing for the compiler, so let's say it's call it JSON payload. Okay, now what I need to do is I need to define this. How you define a object, JSON object? You start creating it. You need to start adding parameters to it. So the first thing is name. It does not need an ID because the ID will be written from the system, which is as it is listed here. The ID will be written from here. You don't need to pass the ID because that's how your API has dictated the rules that how they want to add it. Now the next thing is interesting because I need to add a object inside an object. So what I need to do is my JSON payload dot add, and I need to add an array, or not an array actually, it's an object. So let's do a get data object. Now this method will give me an object. It'll give me an object, and then that object I can add. So when you look at this, you can, the value have different options. You can pass static text, you can pass different things, and let me show you what options are there. Okay, You have key value. Value can be JSON token, value can be JSON object, the value can be JSON value, JSON array, boolean. So you can just keep scrolling. There are 16 overload to it, so you can pass everything that you need to an object here. Okay, so now I need to get the data object, and that will be returned. So let's call it data object, and inside the data object I can define the object that I need. So I can start adding year, I can start adding price, as many parameters as I need, right? Okay, is it mandatory to use this? No. Let me create my JSON object. Okay, name Saurav, year 1984, experience, how many years I don't remember, but 10 14 years, yeah, 14. Product, let's say business central. Okay, and let's put the last parameter as city, and let's name it as my current city, Dehradun, India. Nice. Okay, so this is the object that will this is the data that is associated with this particular entity. The ID will be generated by the endpoint when it is being consumed, but it needs output as text to be added. So what I need to do, the last thing is my JSON payload is to write to, and I can actually write this to an, let's see what I can write it to. I can again write it to a text or to a stream. So what I'm going to do is write it to an object called payload, and my payload becomes my return variable. So this will return the payload, and if everything goes well, my post command will create an object called Saurav on the server. Okay, so we are good with it. We have everything that we needed. Let's try to see, can we execute the post method now. So this is going to create the object into the server that I'm trying to create it. Okay, let's come up here and see what happens. So with this, when I click on it, because I have said in case of post, in the response management side, I have said in case of post, show me whatever has been written from the server. So I forgot to set the page ID into startup. So let's see, SDH something API handler. Okay, let's try to do a post. When I try to do a post, it returns me a ID FFF, which is not an integer. So my selection, field selection, is completely wrong. But pay attention here, the name is Saurav. There is an additional value that is coming in, is created at the data section creates an object, have an object year, experience, product, and city. So the way the endpoint is defined here, we did define the object here, and the system did generate the response including the created at, but the created at is defined after the name, which doesn't matter because it's just the same object at the same time. So this is the response that I'm getting with the post command. Super simple. Now let's try to delete an object, because that's the next thing in our queue. It may not be the next thing, but let's try to do this. Okay, let's first read the documentation for the delete. So when you try to delete an object, you just need to give the URL with an ID of the record that you are deleting, let's say 6, and you'll get a response as a message that this has been deleted. So I don't need to pass anything on to the request. It just need to be part of the URL that I'm requesting. Okay, let's come back to the code. Let's go back to the page where we are. We did talk about post. Let's directly get into the delete. Now delete is right now sending this endpoint. So let's try this. We'll change this here and let's call the delete. Let's see what else we have to do on the delete. I'll copy again from the get and I'll put it into my delete 2, and this becomes my delete. This also becomes my delete. Okay, there's no payload on the delete, so I don't need to generate a payload for it. In the response, I also need to add here, or let's add it into a separate line if in future if you want to do something out of it. Okay, delete, then do the same thing as you're doing there. Okay, so what we are going to do is we are going to run the same code, and let me see the page number, which is 50,005. Let me set this on my log.json. Okay, and let's see. So this we should test this out with this endpoint which is listed here. So I'll just copy this as it is, and if everything goes well, I should be able to get the message in the response as object id 6 has been deleted. Okay, so let's see what happens now. Once it kind of loads, I'll just change the URL at this point. Come on. Okay, change it to 6 and let's try to do a delete. It says error 6 is a reserved ID and the data object on it of it cannot be deleted. You can create your own new object via post request and try to send a delete request with the new generated object ID. Okay, so this is response from the API that you cannot delete the records which are predefined in the system. So you will not be able to delete any of these objects which are defined by the system. But if you want to test the delete, it says you need to create a new and using the post, and then you can try to delete it. Okay, so we already have dealt with the post, which is here, this one. We just need to, whatever is coming out of it, we just need to test it out, store it in the database. So let's do a post. Okay, again to see what the response is. So we'll have to save this into the system. The only problem here is that ID that I have defined is integer, but this seems I give it, but I'll not take risk and I'll say it is a text. So now what I'll have to do is I'll have to post or change my yes, I'll have to change my data type of that field and convert it to something so that this value can be supported. Okay, no worries. Let's come back here and let's quickly change that. So on the table, on the header table, the ID will not be an integer. Let's make it as code 50. Okay, and then I can do the ID. Why it is, oh, on the sub page I also need to change this, and there might be some other areas that I'll be changing it just to kind of sync this change. Okay, this gets settled in, header table got settled in, there's a code. Now where else it's failing? Okay, let's come here on this code unit. Here it's failing because it's trying to pass the response ID, okay, which is passing from here as a response ID. So I need to change the response ID Okay, as code 50. Okay, my bad. Let's convert this as code 50. And the idea is so that we can store the responses from the system that's being generated. And now this will not be an integer, it will be dot as code. Is there? Yes, as code. Okay, so this will store it here, and then in the function, wherever I'm calling it, in the header and the line, I'll have to change it to code 50, and here also to code 50. Hopefully that solves everything. Okay, if response ID is blank. Okay, that's how you need to do this. Okay, a simple data type can be painful, but okay, I didn't knew that it was not integer. Sorry for that. Okay, everything looks sorted. So now what I need to do is from my code unit here, whenever the post call is made, where is the post call? Here. When the post call is made, while processing, I'll also have to write it. Okay, so, and let's keep the message also in there, just to keep it simple. Let's do this. We have this separate code unit. Okay, we'll say, can I write the response back into the head table? Write record in database, and I'll get the object. I'll write the object. Yes, that should do this. So what I'm doing here, if you pay attention, in the post, whenever the post is responding, it is responding me with the JSON object, and we have already written that logic when we are doing a get. So the same method can be used again to write that data into the system. But there's a difference that I would like to mark manually created record or user created record as, or reserved record as separate. That's what the message was, right? Reserved record. So I would like to create the non-reserved record so that I can see them differently, because when I'm trying to delete a specific object, it says method not allowed / object. Okay, something is happening. Oh, I did not change the URL. Okay, it says it's reserved. So whenever I'm writing these existing one, I should tag them as reserved. So I'm going to create a new field on the header table, and we'll call them as reserved boolean, and that'll be reserved. Anything that is automatically tagged from the system, coming from the system, will get the reserved tag. Whenever we are doing a get, which means whenever the system records are being created, they'll be tagged as get and they will be marked as reserved. Or let's flip the switch, because when I create manually, it'll also come as this. Let's call this as not reserved. Okay. So in this scenario, whenever I'm making the post call, I would like to call this as not reserved as true, and in the get call, I would like to call them reserved as false. What happens with that is, in this, I'll create an option is reserved, boolean is not reserved, sorry. So here it'll say yes, this is not reserved, and this will say this is reserved. Now what happens with this? this gets passed when we are either doing read the object, or yeah, this goes into the read the object also. So I need to pass this here, and then from read the object it will also go into write to header. Okay, so many places. Okay, and then when the header gets written, it'll define here SDH not reserved is not reserved. Okay, there will be some compilation error for sure, that makes sense. So let's start from top. Is not reserved. When you are reading the object, you need to say is it reserved or not, and the read object will happen. In that case, it will also go to the array. So let's pass it here, and let's also pass it to the array. Where is that array? Yes, here. I'm just trying to make sure that any record that I'm creating is already had this field available. Okay, now this will handle this. This is shorted out. In the array I have the variable, so I'll just pass this along, and hopefully that solves all the problem. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is when I'm going to do a post, it'll add the boolean, and that will be visible on the page. So let's add it on the list page also, just quickly. Not reserved. Okay, and then let's also add it on the list page, because that's where the visibilities are good, right? Okay, on the card page, sorry. Okay, we have done that. Now when we are calling delete, we'll have to pass and look for any object which is not reserved, and then pass that ID with the URL. So what happens on the page at this moment is when the delete is being called, it is relying on the URL to access, and then in this delete method we can just change the URL to access to something else, or we'll just get the ID from there. Okay, let's publish this for the moment. So with this we'll be able to post and then also store that record into my database, and there is an error. Oh, and that was expected, I guess, because I'm making a destructive change. Don't do it on your production ever, and you can't do it on production, but be very conscious when you are changing the schema mode, because that also means loss of data. If there's a data type change or table property change, not table property, table name change, or field data type change. So the idea here is that now when we run this, the post will be able to store our custom data into that table, and then while we are doing the delete, we'll get the ID from there. So if I look at it from here, it should be able to show me that there is hopefully nothing at this point. The data should have been deleted, but let's have a look. Okay, there's nothing. Let's do a get of all the objects that were there in the system, and this will load this table with all the records that are reserved in the system. So you'll be able to see all the system generated 13 records which are there, and it did something off. Okay, oh, because now it's the ID is a text field, so it is shorting it differently, but it is 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12 13. So there are 13 records. Let's call the post. Once we call the post, this should get loaded again, and there should be a new record that has been created, which is created based on the post command. And you can keep pressing post. The system will always give you a unique ID of that record, and this is marked as not reserved. So now you can come here, you can manually copy this if needed, or you can change it in your code. It's a pretty simple code. Paste the URL here or the ID here, and then now we call the delete. When the delete happens, as per the documentation here, you'll get a message that object with ID 6 has been deleted. In the same way you get the message here, object with ID has been deleted. We haven't written a logic that if you call the delete, that record from the table should also get deleted, and so on and so forth, but you get the point. And you can again parse this message, get the ID from it, or maybe parse the URL, get the ID from it, and then also delete it in Business Central if needed for that matter. But you can only delete records that you have created. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, let me just delete this for the reference because this has been deleted from the server. We will get into the other two elements which are still missing. One is put and another is patch. So let's look at the put. The put query is an update query. You need to give the ID of the object that you are updating, and then the payload or the schema of the object that you are changing, and it'll automatically update that onto the system. In the response, you will get the whole object ID with a parameter of updated at and at what time. So we have done this. We have utilized this object, or we have created this payload for a different scenario. We can use it and then try to call the put method. So what I can do here is I can go back to our code, and just to save time, going back into this code unit, copying it from the post record as it is, everything, and putting it into the put request as it is, changing the method from post to put, changing the method from post to put, going down here, handling the put. Okay, put. I just want to see the response. If you have to handle it, go ahead, I don't mind that, but for the demo we are just doing the handling with the message. Now in this, we get the URL to access. We will use the same payload that we have generated, as in if you want to do it different, it's your call, right? It's the same way as we created that one. So if you want, let's do a small change here. Let's use the put payload, and I'm not going into details of it, but it works in the same way as we did. Okay, so we'll use the same object, but in this we'll change the name if needed. We'll say put request. Okay, now this will get response when we are getting that output from it, so that you understand that this is what's happening, and then this becomes the payload that is being written. Simple. So let's try to utilize the put, where not instead of Saurabh Dhyani, we'll be picking a standard object, let's say 6 or 7. Hopefully we can do that. If not, we'll deal with our object, and we'll try to see what happens when we try to utilize this URL, because currently the name of this is set to Apple MacBook Pro 16. If everything goes well, our response should show us that it is now called the data attributes will be mine, but the object name will be put request. So let's do a put. Oh sorry, I forgot to change the URL, my bad. And you might change this in code, it's your call. I just don't want to do it from there. Let's do the put request. Again, 7 is it. Okay, saved record, so you can't change it. So let's do a post. Sorry, you don't need to. Let's do the reset URL and do a post. Okay, I did the post. Let me see what ID was generated, and I'll use that to do the put request. So again, you can't update the record which is reserved, so you'll need to get the ID of the record that you want to change it. Right now it's called Sauravyani, and all these details, the details should remain same. I should get the name as different. Okay, so I'm going to append this here. This is how they wanted to do it, and then I'm going to call the put request. Now if you look at it, the name of this object have been changed to put request. Updated time is here, date and time is here. The data remains same. The name of the object was Sauravyani, which is now changed to the put request. Updated date is here and the data remains same. So you are only making change to one of the properties. You could have made change to all the properties if needed for that matter. Okay, so like here we are getting the response. The last one is patch, where you only provide the property that you want to change in the payload, and then that object gets updated to its value and everything else remains same. So in the put you are giving the whole request. In the patch you only give the changed property value that you want to partially update. That should be simple enough. So let's go back in here and let's create a patch request just to keep it simple. I'll just copy this. Okay, and let's call it as patch request, and I'll change the name as patch request. Okay, coming here, I'll just copy this as it is to keep it simple and save time, and let's put it into the patch request, and then let's change this to patch and stay. At the end, if you think you're done, I have a little announcement to make at the end just to get your feedbacks, which is important to what's coming next into this series. If you're interested, we'll talk about it. Okay, here in case of HTTP method patch, I would like to do this, or maybe let's copy it here too. Okay, in these three scenarios I just want to see the message. Again, if you want to write it, you know how to write it. I'm not getting into that detail now because we have already spent a good amount of time into it. Alright, so this will try to patch that request that we're making. We'll have the same problem that you can't modify or patch a request which has been already, which is a reserved one. So we'll have to go ahead and post a new record. Hopefully that record should already exist into the endpoint, but who knows how long they stay. But let's try doing this. Okay, I'll copy the ID from here. The name, pay attention to it, is Sauravyani at this moment. Coming back here, making a patch request, which happens with this. So we'll do a patch request. Once I do a patch request, it says put request, and the reason being, let's have a look into my payload management. Oh, I did not change the calling function, my bad, sorry. This is the problem when you start copying pasting things. Okay, so this is my patch request and I've changed the method definition now. So now the new payload will go, which will then tell us that it's a patch request, not a put request. Okay, let me see, what is this? This is this. Okay, let's append the object ID here and let's do a patch request. Once you do the patch, you get the updated object with the header name as patch request, and everything else remains same. Now if you have paid attention to it, this is all these different methods, either get, post, put, patch and delete, all calling the same function called make request. So my make request is handling all kind of requests at this point. Now this is an example of basic or no auth, where there is no authentication that's needed for it, right? But there are other kind of authentication that are needed, and I'm not sure if you guys are enjoying this or not. But if you want me to do a similar kind of video series on, let's say, basic auth first, please type basic auth into the comments and I'll start planning for those videos. The third part that I'm thinking about it, if you guys are interested, is to deal with the OAuth kind of authentication. Now for the basic authentication, I only know, and I'm trying to find it, I only know the Business Central on-prem API endpoints. But if you have a better idea, if you know a website, like I just found this one, RESTful API for the no auth, if you know a website, add it into the comment section. If you guys don't, then, and if you guys are not able to find something and you still comment the basic auth into the comment section, I'll utilize the BC on-prem API endpoints to do the another part of the series with basic authentication. Once we do that, we'll think about the future, which is OAuth authentication. So till then, keep learning, keep sharing, and please do comment into the videos. Please provide me your suggestions as you did in the previous 4-part series of this video, and because of you or because of your comment, I'm making this. So it's all based on your request. If you still have some questions, add it into the comment section. The question, as soon as they come, I'm also fresh into it and I'm working on it, so I'll be able to quickly respond to it. Thoughts, suggestions, topics, everything into the comment section. Please do share this video with one of your friends who is struggling or had struggled in the past with doing API consumption with AL code. And I'll see you sooner than later into the next video in this series if you comment. Okay, till then, have a nice day and I'll see you soon. Keep learning and keep sharing. Thank you. Okay.